Hello and shalom, brothers and sisters, Messiah Yeshua. Welcome back. I'm Jeremy, and today we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls and the megalithic destruction of evidence that took place. So many of you are probably wondering why I'm connecting the Dead Sea Scrolls to my megalithic series, and we'll get into that. But for those of you that don't know, in my series, I believe that before there was a biblical flood, there was a Stone Age megalithic world. And this was a civilization built in stone, buried by the biblical flood. And this flood covered that whole Stone Age world in water, leaving behind rubble, debris, buried ruins, fossils, and mud as evidence for us that the Word of God is still true and accurate and relevant for our lives today. You see, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were found at Qumran many books, what we would call scrolls or epistles, letters, and evidence of biblical accounts. And one of the things that they find here in this area that they've dug up is the books of Enoch and the books of Jubilees, which talk about what happened before the flood. And what a lot of people don't know is today that there is so much connection to the New Testament with what took place at Qumran and the people that were there. And I've done a video on that in depth. If you go back and watch my Dead Sea Scrolls Are Alive video, it's there. I will be covering some of the things here in this video from there, but mostly I want to talk about something that took place here at Qumran that nobody really talks about and you don't hear a lot about, and probably 90% of the people that look into the Dead Sea Scrolls don't even know about. And so follow me as I go through this, and we're going to find out what took place. There was some destruction that happened, and I believe covering up of evidence that gives a lot of credence to my theory that the people at Qumran were actually believers of Yeshua and the early disciples of John the Baptist moving forward. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, there were scrolls. They look kind of like this. They found all through the caves of Qumran there and next to the Dead Sea. And early on when they found them, they just, some of the people that found them were trying to even sell them in, newspaper ads and stuff. And they didn't really get a whole lot of publicity until the people found out what they actually had. And then so over the next 50 or so years, they were taken and studied and looked into and connected to the Bibles that we have today. And we found that they're very accurate, that the Word of God has been preserved. And along with that, like I was talking about earlier, Enoch and Jubilees, for the longest times, the oldest known manuscripts we had for those were from like the 900 or 1100 AD. And it was kept in the Ethiopian Bible and so forth. And so people didn't really have a lot of faith in that they thought that those books were written after the fact. When we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, we found that those books were actually written well before the time of Yeshua, and they actually give lots of evidence for Yeshua being the Messiah. And some of these things that we found out later on were not just papyrus, but they were actual leather and skins from animals. And you can see, last video we talked about John the Baptist. He was baptizing right there in that area, just east of where these caves were all found. Some of them were written on copper, known as the Copper Scroll, and you can go look into the Copper Scroll Project. And it's written in there that there's another a silver scroll and a gold scroll that they haven't found yet, but they're believed to be hidden somewhere in those areas of the Dead Sea. And with it, they were written in different types of Hebrew, Paleo-Hebrew, modern type, Assyrian block, cryptic scripts, Aramaic, Greek, and also Nabatean scripts. So there's several different ones that were written in there because these are different scrolls that had been preserved for a long time and also written in around that time. And we're going to look at some of the ones that were actually written around that time in this teaching. And so you can see as they go through these scrolls what they look like on the left, and then after they do their analysis and stuff, and you can read them. And here's just one from the Book of Genesis where it talks about in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and it goes on in that very first verse talking about that. I just thought I'd throw that in there. And some of them were found in jars, such as you see there, in different areas. So they're not all found at Qumran. Some were found down, all the way down as far as Masada and up through the area there. But the majority of them were found there in Qumran. And so what I want to point out, you got the cave system on the right, and on the left just a list of some of the 1 through 4 cave, because cave 4 being the most prominent with the most things found in it. But if you look in the middle, you'll see the books and the number of the books found. And it's not fragments, it's different actual books that were there that they found. And not all of them were whole books, some of them only fragments, but they know that they are different books. So Psalms, there was a total of 39 books of Psalms found. In Deuteronomy, there was 33. But you see, the third highest book found there was the Book of Enoch. And there was 25 of those, and I think those numbers may have been changed or updated recently, even more or less, I'm not sure, but that might be the most accurate right now. And it's even said that there was a full Book of Enoch in the Aramaic script that was taken and kept for somebody's private collection, though that's just theory. It's another conspiracy, whether it's true or not. Maybe one day we'll find out. But with it, even without it, there was 25 different written books of Enoch, not full, but that they found fragments for. And so that's very significant, even more than the book of Genesis, where they found 24, and more of Isaiah was 22. And then the next one in the list was Jubilees. So Enoch and Jubilees had more than Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and more than Daniel, more than Jeremiah, more than Ezekiel, Job, Tobit, Kings, all of them. And that's very significant. And so a lot of people just kind of say, yeah, they were just, they kept them for whatever reason. And people, a lot of people that are talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls aren't really giving enough significance to what we see here, that the Book of Enoch and Jubilees that we have, they've called them pseudepigrapha, which means somebody else wrote them than the actual authors. But the reason they say that, the Book of Jubilees says it's written by Moses. Book of Jubilees is claimed to be written by Moses, whereas the Book of Enoch is claimed to be written by Enoch. So just because we don't have a book that's that old as Moses and Enoch, they call them pseudepigrapha, meaning, well, somebody else probably wrote them. Or could it just be that we only have a copy of the original that was passed on, and the originals are just so old they're gone, which is more likely the case, that these were just copies of the originals, but even then, they're still 200 to 300 years before the time of Yeshua. And even now with AI, they said they're even probably nearly 100 years older than what we originally thought. So as we move forward, I want you to keep that in mind. This video isn't about bringing evidence for Enoch and Jubilees, but I just wanted to put that in there because I've talked about that many times in the past, and I've used scriptures from Enoch and Jubilees. And the big thing, the one thing, if you're going to take anything away from this video, is that it doesn't matter what book you're reading that predates Yeshua and even the letters of the epistles. Everything in all of it, when you receive the eyes to see and ears to hear, it all points to Yeshua as the Messiah and the kingdom and why we're here and what is coming, the world that's coming. All right, so let's move forward. All right, here's from the just a hiking trail of the Holy Land. It shows you Qumran there, where you can go hike through, but it shows you some of the caves up there to the north, where they first found the first one, number 1, and then 2 and 3. And so it wasn't in the order of from Qumran, the settlement itself, but you can see in the orders, I think, of how they found them. But where the visitor center and the archaeological site is, I'll show you some pictures of that. But you see 1 and 3 are up there, Cave 11, Cave 6, 4 through 5, and 7 through 10. And then just recently they've found Cave 12. And I don't know what has fully come out of Cave 12 yet, but you can look more into that. All right, so here's what Cave 1 looks like. Moving on, stepping back, you can see off there to the right, Cave 1 is over there. And then here's another picture. You can see that the caves, and there's cave 1, and then also again, that's what it looked like. Cave 2 is just off from cave 1. So sorry, I went through those pretty quick, but you can just pause it and look at those pictures. I don't want to spend too much time on these, but those I think were the original caves where some of the stuff was found. There's cave 2. Here's a picture of cave 3. And then cave 4, this is the one that's most notable, that everybody you see in pictures, and this is, I think, where they found the most scrolls. But this is the one that gets all the hype. And there's another close-up of it, and then you can see from the backdrop the wadi that's coming down. And I have a video I'll show you of that actual water flowing. But that's cave 4 down there, and here's inside cave 4. And then cave 5, I can't quite make out where it was on this picture, but I think it's that one that's collapsed right there at the bottom, and then around from the side there's cave 6. And so you can see that these are all just to the naked eye, they're over time they don't really look like much, but then when you go inside it and they found these scrolls in these jars, it's pretty amazing. But here's looking out from the visitor center. You can look and see all the different caves, and what I want you to pay attention to is cave 9 and 7 there, and you can see that they are kind of just all gone. Cave 7 is completely wiped out, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, is cave 7 and what was found in cave 7 and how significant it is to this settlement and what they found. So again, here's just another picture. Cave 7 and 8, you can see they're down below, and they were lower down, but they're today now collapsed. And so looking all around this area, this is where many of the caves were, but like I said, they found some way down in Masada, and some up north, 1 and 3. This is just an old picture of it. I don't know what's going on with these little white hairs. I found this online. All right, and then here's just when I was there, a video that I took while the actual wadi was flowing. So you can see the water is coming down here from the area, and I guess this doesn't happen very often, so it was pretty neat to see that. You can see it coming around the rocks, and it's not a rainy day or anything else, but the water was just moving that day for whatever purpose. It flooded out the road below, and they had to detour the traffic, but I just thought this would be a good time to show you guys the area. So as we follow the wadi, sorry I had my camera zoomed all the way out, so it kind of messed up the image, but you can see the railing and then the Dead Sea. And in some of the old mosaics, you can see just up there that we by the Dead Sea, that there was a branch that came off over to this area. I don't think it's here anymore, but in mosaics it showed it. But you can see there the Dead Sea in the background. And so just another video of it. This one's got a little bit of sound, so I apologize if there's wind. And it used to be that you could walk all through the back of there. They've since cut that off, so you can't walk back there. There's cave 4. But there was a lot of hype about the Copper Scroll Project and everything back up at the top to the right up there. Right back there in the background. And so a lot of people were going up there, and I think that might be why they cut it off. But it's believed that there are some things still buried under there in another cave that was sealed up. And they have yet to let the people dig to find out what's there. Maybe there is something, maybe there's not, but it's believed that that's where the copper or the gold scroll, I think, and the silver scroll are, and some of the old temple things. So anyway, sorry about that grainy video again. My camera's zoomed all the way out to try to get a close up. Alright, so moving on. Cave 7, 8, and 9. So you can see cave 9 is down there. Cave 7 and 8. 7 has been collapsed. And there's cave 10. And cave 11. And I don't have pictures from cave 12. But there's cave 11 at night Just a beautiful picture. And so here's all those caves. And so again, what we're talking about today mostly is this Cave 7 and what took place at Cave 7 and what they found in it. Okay, looking down, you can see the caves as well, the majority of them where they found the most scrolls, but off to the left out there is where caves 1 through 3 and 11 were. And so the majority of the scrolls in Cave 4, you can see that there's a lot of scrolls they found, and there's over 700 images that you can go on the deadseascrolls.org.il and look at all these images. And so what I want to point out, though, is from Cave 7, there's 19 scrolls. You can find Cave 7Q1 through 7Q19, and it's very little fragments, but what they found in there was books in Greek. And so one of the ones that they found was the Septuagint Book of Exodus, and that's been confirmed. They found that, and it's written in Greek. So it's not, this one wasn't written in Hebrew. They also found, that's a picture of Cave 7. They also found the Epistle of Jeremiah, which is also known as the last chapter of Baruch, and it was written in Greek. And so the book of Baruch, and like we've talked about in the past, many of the apocryphal books were part of the Bible for 1,500 years until they started taking out in AD 1500 with King James and other books and everything else. But before that, they all contained it. And the Ethiopian Bible today contains the Apocrypha, and that's books like Maccabees, Baruch, and Second and Esdras, and so forth. All right, and then in 7Q8 through 8, 11, 12, 13, and 14, they believe that those are fragments from the Book of Enoch. But all the rest of them, here's also written on stone, some Greek that was found in there. But all the rest of the scrolls that they found in there were unidentified. It says unidentified, but that's not true. When you go to the website and everything that you see, it will say that they are unidentified. But like I said, that's not true, because in April of 1972, Dr. O'Callaghan, he spent 2 weeks examining the fragments, and he was an internationally famous papyrologist, if that's how you say that. He studied papyri. It says, one of the very highest experts in the field. He was the founder of the Seminario, that name, and the journal Studio, all about papyri, okay? It says, to his own amazement, when he studied these, he identified the 9 fragments with certainty, not guessing, not anything. He was 100% certain that they belonged to 6 New Testament books. So that is super significant, because how in the world did 6 different New Testament books make their way into the Dead Sea Scrolls? And then they were covered and left for us to find 2,000 years later in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because people have debated books like Peter, whether it was actually written by Peter. Older evidence, they believe, showed that it was more probably written 100 years to 200 years after the time of Peter, and so they believed it may have been pseudepigrapha, written by somebody else's hand. But one of the books that they found in there is 2 Peter, and they've identified it as 2 Peter. But the mainstream archaeology wouldn't say that. They're just going to say, oh, it's unidentified. And as we read, let's read what it says. It says, continuing on the left, it says, to identify and date fragments, papyrologists use an array of tools: style of calligraphy, microscopic infrared analysis, stereomicroscopy, all these big words, massive computer database, etc. It says the vast majority of the Dead Sea Scrolls are mere fragments like those in Cave 7. The Old Testament fragments date to 100 and more years before Christ, before Messiah, and have been identified using the same methods that Dr. O'Callaghan used. It says O'Callaghan identified the following fragments with certainty, and these are the fragments. So 7Q4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, and 19, he says they are 1 Timothy 3:16 and 4:3. He think the other one is Mark. The other book is Acts. Another one from Mark. Another one from the book of James. Another one from the book of Romans. Another one from 2 Peter, and one from Mark. And then the last one Fragment 19, he believes, is probably a commentary on Romans. So the book of Romans had to have been written by whom? Paul. And where I'm going with this is if you've looked at my study from the Dead Sea Scrolls and that community, they called themselves out there Damascus, and we'll look at those here in just a second. But when Paul was going to Damascus, most people today would say that he was going to Syria. But it was my belief, and many people are starting to come onto this as well, that Paul was going out there to the Dead Sea Scrolls community, to those people in Qumran, because they were followers of Yeshua, and originally they were out there making the way straight for Yeshua with John the Baptist, collecting and preserving all these words and these scrolls. And so how could the book of Romans get there? Well, if Paul was the one that wrote the book of Romans and he was there in Damascus with them, like the New Testament says, then they would have preserved his works as well. So these aren't my guesses. This is Dr. O'Callaghan, and we'll read a little bit more, that these books, 1 Timothy, Mark, Acts, James, Romans, 2 Peter, and Mark, they were probably all in there. But what we will later find out, you can do the research, is after he published this, they were going to go back to that cave and search it more for more fragments. And then when they had the chance to get back there, they found that after this was published, it was wiped clean. Some say it was blown up. You'll hear evidence that it was blown up and there's fire residue and so forth. You'll hear other evidence that it was just collapsed. But for whatever purpose, this cave now has been completely destroyed, and we will never be able to find out what else was in there. However, Dr. Callahan's studies are still out there, and you can go look at them yourself. They've never been pulled back. They've been debated, but now they're still in the museum. You can see them for yourself, and nobody can question them, and it actually fits that these books, New Testament books, were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, so it goes on. It says, O'Callaghan found evidence that Cave 7 held a New Testament library, right? Along with the Septuagint, along with Baruch, but they believe that this was the New Testament or the Greek cave where they kept most of the Greek documents. It says, but the fact that there are 4 fragments of Mark, which are written in 4 different hands, but on the same papyrus batch. So that's 4 different people writing 4 different books of Mark. So they weren't just keeping one book of Mark, it was 4 different ones. It suggests that not only that serious efforts were being made to copy and distribute books of the New Testament, particularly the Gospel of Mark, very early on, that the papyri of Cave 7 represents a collection of New Testament documents, some of which were multiple copies of the same books. A veritable bookstore, certainly, but also probably a Christian reference or lending library. So they were there at Qumran, where scrolls were being written in Old Testament hands before, but now after the time of Yeshua, they're there being written by believers, making copies and distributing copies of New Testament documents, such as the Book of Mark. So this was a distribution center where they were writing documents, and nobody will disagree with you that at Qumran they were writing scrolls and collecting them and copying them. But what people weren't going to tell you is that they were also New Testament believers writing them as well, giving more evidence again that that area was originally those of John the Baptist followers. Later on, after the time of Yeshua, they all were collecting there, writing these books, copying them down, making several copies and distributing them throughout the area, sending the gospel out from that point. It goes on, it says, to his credit, O'Callaghan published his findings, though he knew that he would be savaged by the skeptics in academia, who would defend their liberal theories to death. Some of the popular theories are these. The Gospels were based on oral testimonies and were not written down until after the lifetime of the apostles. Again, now we know that's not true. He says the Gospels are a mixture of truth and fable. Most of the New Testament, well, this is what they would say. Most of the New Testament was not written by the traditional authors. For example, Acts was not written by Luke, James was not written by James, and Peter was not written by Peter. And they've gone on with that. Even many in the Christian circles have said that that's probably not the case. But Cave 7 gives us evidence that that is the case, that the authors did write them because it was in the time of their lifetime. And not only did they write them, but people at Qumran were copying them, several hands copying the book of Mark, who was not a disciple directly of Yeshua. Some believe he was a disciple of Peter and Paul and Barnabas, and others say that he was one of the 72 of Yeshua. But whatever he was, we know that he was a believer in Yeshua, and we have his gospel today. And we see that there were many hands that wrote his gospel or copied his gospel at Qumran. And it was left there after 70 AD when it was destroyed. Okay, goes on. It says O'Callaghan knew that all, in that right column, starting from the top, O'Callaghan knew that all he stood to gain from publishing his findings at the Rockefeller Museum would be ridicule from just about every branch of academia there was. So he had a hard decision to make. Do I publish this and look like and be attacked? But he decided to publish the truth. It goes on and says, that is a forbidding prospect for any man to face, and yet he was too honest to deny what he had discovered. His integrity would not allow that, so he took the bit between his teeth and did publish what he found, and went on to defend what he found for many years to come against all kinds of assaults and challengers, but not once did he give in to them. O'Callaghan plowed on, regardless of the critics, patiently publishing numerous rebuttals to the objections, all of which helped immensely, for it gave O'Callaghan, as well as others, the opportunity to fine-tune the arguments. And it is worth noting that all this fine-tuning led to not one of his identifications being changed. Completely accurate what he published. It says they were certainly challenged, though not all, but none were ever changed. That's very significant. That means that through all the scrutiny and everything that he had gone through, nobody was able to go through and positively identify that he was wrong. So what do they do instead? They mark them as unidentified text, rather than using the same evidence that was used for all the other books to identify them. He used to identify the New Testament documents. They don't accept it, because how can New Testament documents be there? And now when you go visit the Dead Sea Scrolls, I've showed this video in my last teaching on the Dead Sea Scrolls, well, my first teaching, the Dead Sea Scrolls Are Alive, how the visitor center video literally plays, instead of telling you what happened and took place there and anything about the community, it literally is a rebuttal to John the Baptist being the person that's out there. That's what the visitor center will now play the video. I don't know if it's still there now, but it was a few years ago when I was there. So it goes on, it says, they were certainly challenged, although not all, but none of them were ever changed. They were only strengthened by the process. The papyrus evidence from Cave 7 is that good. Cooper, The Authenticity of the New Testament Fragments of Qumran. So, going on, moving forward, again, these were positively identified to be the books of 1 Timothy, Mark, Acts, James, Romans, 2 Peter, Mark, and also another one from Romans. Theed's authenticate. So this is just from one other scholar. He says this in the 1990s. Dr. Karsten Peter Theed, 1952 to 2004, says another expert in the field of papyrology defended Callahan's work. He published numerous articles on his plus book, Rekindling the Word in Search of the Gospel of Truth. Theed also dated the Magdalene GR17 papyrus fragment of the Gospel of Matthew to about AD 66. Okay. He defended this in his book, The Jesus Papyrus. He was director of the Institute for Basic Epistemology Research in Paderborn, Germany, and spent the last 3 years of his life with the Israeli Antiquities Authority repairing Dead Sea Scrolls and excavating the possible location of Emmaus. So there's other experts out there that agree with what O'Callaghan found. However, they still refuse to put it. When you go to the website, they're not going to tell you what it is. They're just going to say it's unidentified. And so many people have no idea that there was a cave there with the Dead Sea Scrolls right next to Cave 4, where the majority where all of the majority of the caves that had the most documents, they also found writings from the apostles of Yeshua himself. The same place where I believe that John the Baptist was writing down Old Testament documents and scrolls and books of Enoch and preserving them in Jubilees, they also wrote down and preserved the New Testament letters and epistles and gospels to be a light to the Gentiles and send them to the world. They copied them there, and then they took them after 70 AD out into the world, such as places like India, where we have the Gospels that they're finding there, the Hebrew Matthew. We're finding all these different things, but they find their origins there in the Dead Sea Scrolls. All right, so here you see, if you go to the website, this is what you'll find. You'll find the 19 fragments, and they're all the same images. You don't get a whole lot of images, not much to look at, though. For the Septuagint, the Septuagint Exodus, you get 4 images, but they all just say unidentified, or maybe Enoch, but most of them unidentified. But we know it's not. O'Callaghan has identified them. They're New Testament documents. All right, and just here's some pictures of them. So when you have the amount of evidence that O'Callaghan showed, and that the arguments are very minimal, and they've never been changed. So we can be certain that this was a cave that did at one time hold New Testament documents and papyrus. But the papyrus doesn't last as long as the leather did, I believe, and that's why some of the leather scrolls lasted much longer. All right. This is information from my teaching on the Dead Sea Scrolls Are Alive. You can go back there and watch it in full and read through this stuff and look at it. But you can see there, Cave 1, it shows to the right, where they originally found some of these things in the different caves. But all these, they call them mikvahs today. Mikvah just means a gathering. It doesn't mean of just water. It can be for other things. But these were baptismal pools, and this is probably why John the Baptist was out here and they were immersing themselves, because they were copying the Word of God over and over and over, and also the Gospels after the fact. So this was the place where they were making a way in the wilderness straight for the Messiah, for the children of light, and for their King coming. And after the fact, the covenant, and go through that video and watch it. But 2,000 years ago, that's what was taking place out there. Go through and read all these things. Sorry, we got the Yahad, right? We see that Yahad is the same word, comes also from the word Echad, which means to be one, and that's what Yeshua told us, right? That they all may be one as we are one. And they called themselves there in Damascus, their settlement, they called it Damascus, and they called it the Yahad, because they were one, and they were making straight the path in the wilderness. We see the different things they found, the scrolls, and the work that they've done. This is all written on the signs there, so you can read through those. I'm just clicking through it. There's a couple of things I want to get to before we finish this video up, but you can see the different things that they found. Again, 2,000 years ago, these were out there. I showed in the past, this is Beth Araba, where John was baptizing. It's the same place we see in Joshua and in the book of John. Beth Araba in the wilderness is what they called it, right, by En-Gedi. And then you see here in this old mosaic, same thing, another mosaic. There's Beth Araba right across from where Qumran was. You can see again there, close up. There it is again on a map, right next to the Dead Sea Scroll, right where Qumran is. Again, on another map, Beth Araba, right there next to the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is where John the Baptist was baptizing. And again, another map showing that. So you can see the official site up to the top right, down below, more likely probably where he was. And if you go back and look at that mosaic, you can see there's a water line coming off of there going over towards the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that circle off to the left, you can see Qumran National Park, and that's where they found the majority of the scrolls, and also the New Testament scrolls. And you can see it is directly east from Jerusalem. And they were out there in the wilderness making straight the way. We see in Joshua in the wilderness of Beth Arabra, right? We see in Isaiah, again, that it says, the voice of him that cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of Yahweh, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. So what wilderness? The wilderness of Beth Arabra. I'm sorry, that word's hard to say for me. Beth Abara or Beth Arabra. What we see in Matthew, right? It says, for this is John the Baptist. What was he doing? He was in the wilderness preparing the way for the Lord to make straight his paths. And again in Mark 13, the voice of one crying in the wilderness. What did we just see? The wilderness in Gedi and Beth Arabra. So make straight the way. That word straight right there. In the desert, highway, that word highway, raised up, public road. I put that in there because we see that John the Baptist, same connection, okay? Matthew and Isaiah, exactly the same. When you look at them in the Greek, same words. And then we see in the Book of Damascus document that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that they called their settlement Damascus. They sojourned in the land of Damascus. And they considered themselves, it was a well in the law because they were writing keeping all of his words out there. That's why they called it a well, right? The water of life is the law. And those who dug it were the converts of Israel who went out to the land of Judah to sojourn in the land of Damascus, right? So they were out there in the wilderness where Beth Arabra was, making straight a way for the Lord. And they considered it a well, and we saw that the water, they were out there baptizing out there. Also in this Damascus document, again, they talk about the members of the new covenant in the land of Damascus. So in this Damascus document found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they considered themselves making straight the way for the new covenant of the Lord, and they were in the land of Damascus. That's what they considered Qumran. It was not called Qumran back then. They called it Damascus. Over and over in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's called Damascus in the wilderness of Beth Abara, where they were making straight the way. And that is where John the Baptist was. And the whole thing that they teach out there is that they shall love each man his brother as himself, and they shall succor or help the poor and the needy and the stranger. And that is what Yeshua came to preach and teach, that the Torah is all about loving your neighbor and loving God. Also out there, they considered themselves having the true knowledge and the righteous judgment of those that have the chosen way, right? And they were in opposition against the Sadducees and Pharisees of the day, the religious leaders that were in Jerusalem. And Yeshua and John the Baptist both rebuke those leaders. They're not rebuking their brothers, Judah, but they're rebuking the religious leaders who did damage to God's word, to Yeshua's word. We see also in the Damascus document, it goes on that they walked in the perfection of the way. They were known as the righteous, right? And they had understanding in all future things before they befell them. And many other writers have written about that they had such perfect, their prophecies came to pass when they talked about them. Again, they write about themselves being perfectly together, and they're out there preparing a way in the wilderness. That's what they're doing in the wilderness. They're writing, talking about that they are preparing the way in the wilderness. What wilderness? Beth Abara at Qumran. It's called Damascus. And again, we see them writing about that again. They're preparing the way of him, as it is written, prepare in the wilderness the way, make straight in the desert a path for our God. Isaiah 4:3. It says this is the path, It's the study of the law. So they were studying the law. And it goes on, and it says in that last sentence, it says, which he commanded by the hand of Moses, that they may do according to all that has been revealed from the age to age, and as the prophets have revealed by his Holy Spirit. So John the Baptist was out there baptizing with water, making straight the way for Yeshua to come baptized with his Holy Spirit. And so we see the comparison from Psalms 27:11, 103:7, and Proverbs 6:23, that teaching your way, right, and lead me in that path because of your enemies. His word is the way, it is the path, it is the light. And Yeshua is the way, the path, and the light. And John the Baptist was out there preparing the way, the truth, and the life, or the way for the Messiah. So here we see in Acts 9:2, this is where it all brings it together of where Paul was going. It says, and he asked for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, the men or women, that he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. And it says how he went on his way, he approached Damascus. So what Damascus is, it's not the Damascus in Syria. It's those believers of Yeshua, where John the Baptist was preparing the way. They called their settlement Damascus. That's what it was known as. That's where Paul was going. He was going after those at Qumran, where they called their settlement Damascus, and they belonged to the way. Even after Yeshua, they went out there to the wilderness, though James and Peter, and they were headquartered in Jerusalem. But at that time, that was later. Before that, when Paul was going after them, they were not in Jerusalem. They were out there in Damascus, writing these Gospels, copying them to send them out to the world, as we see from the evidence of Cave 7. So in Acts 19:11, when Paul is on his way to Damascus after those of the way, we see that Yeshua tells him to go into Damascus, and he says to him, and the Lord said to him, arise and go into the street which is called Straight. That's a very interesting, because those people out there in Damascus, they were making straight the way, or straight the street of the Lord. So Yeshua is giving you a little inside bit of knowledge for those that have eyes to see. He's going to those that were making straight the way in the wilderness, in Damascus. Where Paul was going was to Damascus. And it says he was right outside it, and so he goes into the street called Straight. Where he was going was Damascus. He was going to Qumran. And it goes on in Acts 9:18, it says, and immediately there fell from his eyes as it had been scales, and he received sight forthwith, and arose and was baptized. So he was baptized right there where he was, right, where he was staying in Damascus. Well, we see in Qumran, there were baptismal pools all throughout Qumran. They're all over. Why? Because they were baptizing people there. They were recording the New Testament books, the Old Testament books. They were preserving them to be kept and hidden, and God revealed them to us. 2,000 years later, they were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It says, and he arose and was baptized, and when he had received meat, he was strengthened. Then was Saul certain days with the disciples which were at Damascus. They were not in Syria. They were at the Dead Sea Scrolls community, Qumran, baptizing, making scrolls. In Galatians 1:13, it talks about the conversation in the past in the Jews' religion, right? The Sadducees and Pharisees, how that they beyond measure persecuted the church, right? They were persecuting those that were out there at Damascus. That's where Paul was going. Again, in Galatians 1:19, it says, down in verse 17, neither went I up to Jerusalem to them which were apostles before me, but I went into Arabia, and returned again unto Damascus. Then after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem. So Paul went back to Damascus, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and learned, just like they were learning the community rule and so forth, about Yeshua. And if you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's all about the children of light, turning to love, the new covenant, making straight the way. That's what it's all about. But people will tell you that, oh, well, they have this community rule that's a little bit different than the Torah. And yes, there are some things in it that are different, and they removed themselves from the cares of this world to write about the coming of Yeshua. Thus, Yeshua said of John the Baptist that there is none greater that are born of women than John the Baptist. Okay, and Josephus, he states that because Paul went back there for 3 years to Damascus. Well, when Josephus writes about these people that are in the Judean desert, he says this. He states in connection with the marrying Essenes that they trained their women, like their men, for 3 years. It's very interesting that they were trained for 3 years. So when Paul became a believer, he went to Arabia, he went to the Mount Sinai, and then when he comes back, he didn't go to Jerusalem, like he said. No, where did he go? He went to Damascus for 3 years. Why was he there 3 years? It was probably because he was being trained in the new covenant, in the way of Yeshua, in the way of light, to become children of light. Thus, he writes about being children of light in his words. In the Dead Sea Scroll documents as well, in the Damascus document, it's called, of course, because it's Damascus. It goes on and it writes about the converts of Israel which shall walk. And who are the converts of Israel? The sons of Zadok, right? And that word Zadok comes from the word Zadok, which means righteous. And so they considered themselves priests after the order of Zadok. And what is that? Well, the priesthood of Yeshua, the Melchizedek priesthood, which means king of righteousness, or righteous king, the Melchizedek. And so you can see there it says that that word in Melchizedek from H6664, right there you can see the Hebrew word for it. Well, the same word for Zadok comes from that word as well, Zadok, Melchizedek. So these people who considered themselves the Zadok priesthood, many have said that, well, they have to be physically from the line of Aaron as the Zadok priesthood. But that's not the case, because Yeshua, when you become Yeshua's, you become Abraham's seed, and you are part of his righteous priesthood. And that is exactly what we are told stand by. So the verse isn't popping up here. Sorry about that. But the verse I was going to put back up, I don't know, it's not popping up. It says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. That's 1 Peter 2:9, when it says you are a royal priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood, king and priest, royal, king, priesthood, priest, Melchizedek, which comes from the word Melchizedek. So you are a royal Zadok, a Melchizedek, a royal priesthood. So that's why they considered themselves this. They were what? Walking in his ways perfectly, as you see down there at the bottom. It says, and these are the precepts for the master in which he shall walk in regard to all Israel, for God shall not save any of those who are not established in his ways to walk perfectly. So the sons of Zadok were those that turn from darkness to light and walk in his ways perfectly. They were the converts of Israel. Okay, so moving on from there. Also, we see in the Messianic rule, the sons of Zadok, the priests, under the direction of the heads of the family, right? They considered themselves sons of Zadok, the sons of Levi, but also converts, those that turn to it. We see here in the community, it says this, keepers of the covenant. It says, by a binding oath to return with all his heart and soul to every commandment of the law of Moses, in accordance with all that has been revealed of it to the sons of Zadok, the keepers of the covenant. So they were out there in the wilderness, writing about the new covenant, teaching repentance. That's what the community talks all about. We just heard about returning to his commandments, returning to his, that's what it was all about. John the Baptist was coming and teaching to repent, to turn from darkness to light, return to his commandments. They were the sons of Zadok, and they considered themselves the children of light. We see John talks about the children of light, that, right? It says, while you have the light, believe in the light. Yeshua is the light, right? But we also know the Father is the light. Yeshua is the visible image of an invisible God. It says, you may be the children of light. We also see in Ephesians, it says, for you were sometimes darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. In 1 Thessalonians 5:5, we see it says, you are all children of light and children of the day. You are not of the night nor of the darkness. And that's what was told to Paul, was to go out and turn the Gentiles from darkness to light, from the authority of Satan to God. And so we see the same thing, messengers from John the Baptist in 11:1, right? It says, now when John had heard in the prison the works of Messiah, he sent 2 of his disciples and said unto him, are you the one that should come, or should we look for another? Well, I've showed you this before. What he's talking about in Matthew 11:4, Yeshua answered and said to him, go. He tells him, the blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. There's nowhere in our Bible that talk about the dead being raised up in reference to this being, to Yeshua being the Messiah. This is the evidence that Yeshua is saying, go tell John these things are happening. But we see in Isaiah right here, it doesn't talk anything about the dead being raised to life. And so a lot of people will say, well, he's referencing Isaiah 35:4, but it doesn't talk about the dead being raised to life. Or Isaiah 61:1. It talks about the brokenhearted to proclaim liberty, right? Connecting those two, and the day of vengeance. We see that coming, the day of vengeance, and the two different, the left side and the right side, vengeance and then also salvation. But nothing about being raised to life. And then also some would say, well, maybe it's Psalm 146:7, where it says, and he executed judgment for the oppressed, which give food to the hungry. Yahweh looseth the prisoners, and Yahweh openeth the eyes of the blind, and raiseth them that are bowed down. But again, nothing about being raised from the dead. But in the Messianic apocalypse found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says exactly what Yeshua said to John's disciples, go tell John this, right? And this is what it says in the Messianic apocalypse. Starting there at the very top, it says, the heavens and the earth will listen to his Messiah, and none therein shall stray from the commandments of the holy ones. Seekers of the Lord, strengthen yourselves in his service. All you hopeful in your heart, you will not find the Lord in this, for the Lord will consider the pious and call the righteous by name. Over the poor his spirit will hover, and will renew the faithful with his power, and he will glorify the pious on the throne of his eternal kingdom. But I put that there because what is it? It's the Spirit, his Spirit, and it goes on and says this. He who liberates the captives restores sight to the blind, strengthens the bent, and forever I will cleave to the hopeful, and in his mercy, and the fruit will not be delayed for anyone, and the Lord will accomplish glorious things which have never been. As for he will heal the wounded and revive the dead, and bring good news to the poor. He will lead the uprooted to make the hungry rich. So we see here that it says exactly what he told him to go tell John the Baptist. And if John the Baptist was baptizing at Damascus, at Qumran, and where all these scrolls were being written or preserved, John would have been very familiar with this Messianic apocalypse, and knowing who Yeshua was, he was the Messiah to come. And we also see in the Damascus document, the master will instruct the sons of light, right? At the appointed time for his visitation. The war scroll talks about the sons of light, and the ungodly of the covenant, right? Those that have turned, the vipers that Yeshua talked to them. And we see the master being Yeshua, right? He's called the master, and all over in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it refers to the Messiah as the master. The master, the master. And again, the master, talking about continuing on from here, talking about the Master and all the things that he will do with his holy covenant, the perfect, his eternal covenant. It goes on and talks about abode of his holiness. He's an eternal fountain which shall not fail. And that's Yeshua. And he teach you the knowledge of the holy ones, the waters of life from them that thirst. What did Yeshua say? That he is a fountain of living water, right? They rejected him. So all of these things in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they all point to Yeshua. But many people look at it and they just dismiss the Dead Sea Scrolls as being just a good find. But our God preserved those books and those scrolls for 2,000 years for us to, in the end time, when he knew people would be questioning their authenticity and whether or not it could be trusted, and he gave all that to us. Go ahead and read through these things. Go see that other teaching I did on the Dead Sea Scrolls are still alive. But last of all, I wanted to point this out. It says, the Master shall instruct all the sons of light, and shall teach them the nature of all the children of men, according to the kind of spirit which they possess, the signs identifying their works during their lifetime. So, what spirit is in you? And the Dead Sea Scrolls talks all about the struggle of the spirit of good or the spirit of evil. And along with that spirit of good comes a lot of things that it talks about. And with the spirit of evil comes a lot of different things that the Spirit talks about. And that's why Paul talks about it being not a battle with flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and rulers of the darkness of this world. And it's a battle of the mind and what spirit is dwelling in you. That's why you turn from those spirits of darkness to the spirit of life. So, again, while we're here, everything is taking place because of mortality that entered the world. God originally created everything good. Man, woman, the world, all the matter, and it was very good. And we would have enjoyed it for eternity. But there was also the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which we are all faced with that choice today. Are we going to choose what God calls good? His word, his commandments, those things that are love, loving your neighbor, loving your enemy? Or are we going to choose to walk in good and evil and allowing the anger and hate to overtake us? Because when we chose to eat from that tree, it's the same choice we get to make every day. When a situation arises, I can either choose good, right? And I can respond to this situation with love, or am I going to also mix it with a little bit of evil, a little bit of hate and anger? Because the Bible tells us that the anger of man will never produce the righteousness of God. That's why God never wanted us to know these things, because we now see that the choice we made in the garden was to choose darkness and light instead of just light, what God chose for us. Only good, but we chose good and evil. And now we see that what mankind knowing evil has produced: wars, death, destruction, greed, poverty, poor, death, all of those things. And so when that choice took place, then this thing called mortality started. And so God, I believe, patterned everything after the 6 days of creation, and the seventh day he rest, being a picture of a 7,000-year period, starting with in the first day when he created light, it was good. The light was good, man was good. And then when he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he was now separated, and he knew good and evil, light and darkness. That took place in the first day, and that authority was transferred to Hasatan over this world instead of Adam. Because to whom you obey, to him you're the servants you are. In day 2, we see the second millennium. This is when the flood takes place, and the angels kept not their own abode, but left their habitation, their house, the bet. The Hebrew word bet is house. They came down, and they mingled with mankind. The world was destroyed by the sea, by the water. Day 3, all the people were gathered together. That's the Gimel. It means to gather. They were all gathered in one place in the third millennium at Babel, and then he called the waters seas, or the many nations, the 70 nations. And the dry land appeared. That's when he showed Abraham the land, and the seed that the fruit bears. There was the grass that bears no seed, and then with no fruit. The seed of the grass, they don't bear fruit, but the fruit tree with its seed bears fruit. And you see the two separations there as well. the seed of the serpent, the seed of the woman, or Yeshua's way, the way of life, or the way of the world, the way of the adversary, good and evil, that does not bear fruit. Because every tree that does not bear fruit will be cast out. And in day 4, the lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. This is when the light of the world came into the world. Yeshua being the physical image of an invisible God, right? This is when a physical image was created for the sun, which produces the light of our world. But it was a picture of Yeshua being the physical image of an invisible God, because you can't see where the light comes from. It doesn't all come from the sun, but the light of the world comes from the Son of God. And the lesser light to rule the night, right? We see that Hasatan is also given authority, and we see the separation between the two, right? Yeshua rules over the children of the day, Hasatan ruling over the children of the night. And we see there the Dalet, the D, that is the door. Yeshua came and he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He says, no one gets to the Father except through me. He is the door. We see in the 5th millennium, or day 5, this is when the waters receive life. This is also when Yeshua sends out the disciples out into the world, and they bring with the good news. And when people repent and believe in Yeshua, that he came in the flesh, died and rose to life, that they receive life, the Spirit of life, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. And we see that word Hey is the Hebrew letter for the Spirit, which means breath and spirit, and this is when the Spirit was poured out into all mankind. Prior to that, it was just the Spirit being poured out on the prophets, and so forth. In day 6, we see this is when the land receives the life. I believe this is also talking a picture of when Judah would return to the land, though we see it right now. It's not in truth or in righteousness. They're following a governmental system that is not a biblical Yeshua's system. They don't believe in Yeshua, the truth or the righteousness, just like Isaiah 48 said would happen, that Judah would come out of they would return back to the land out of the waters of Judah, though not in truth or in righteousness, and they would call themselves after the holy city. When it's just Judah, and we see in 1948 they called themselves Israel. They were going to call themselves Judea, but at the last minute they changed it to Israel, fulfilling Isaiah 48:1, I believe. And we see here, this is also when the two will become one, when Yeshua and his bride, just like Adam and Eve, were created here on day 2, and they became one. He took him, the woman was taken out of his rib, but this is where they've come together, and we will rule and reign. The and means bringing two together, and we enter into the millennium to rule and reign with him for 1,000 years. This is when we turn our weapons of war into plowshares. We see that the Zion, it's called the crowned Vav, so that Vav that was on day 6, those two that became one, are now crowned, and this is when they rule and reign for 1,000 years, being the Melchizedek priesthood, Melech Zedek, Israel, meaning the upright of El, the upright of God. So all of this was pictured in this 7,000-year period, showing this time period of mortality that man has to deal with and the evil that will be in the world, until during the 7th millennium, Hasatan will be bound for 1,000 years, and there will be peace on earth unlike we've ever seen. I believe the earth tilts, atmosphere changes, people live longer. The water goes back up into the atmosphere as a canopy of a cloud that surrounds the whole earth, with a blue border, just like our clothes are bordered. We're told to border the 4 corners, which I don't believe are 4 tassels. I believe it's all the way around. One blue ribbon that goes all the way around, just like the earth goes all the way around. And I believe that time will be restored, but people will still die, because there's going to be people that survive the Great Tribulation that are not believers in Yeshua, and they have to go up year by year to worship the King on the Feast of Tabernacles, which is also a picture of the Feast for the Nations and the offering for the nations, and a picture of our 7,000-year period of tabernacling in these temporary bodies called mortality, our garment of wool, waiting to put on our immortal garment, our garment of linen. So, and then we enter into day 8. After that, the four ages. The first age was the age of creation and chaos, as we saw the megalithic structures all around the world being built until the flood wiped it all out, because the angels gave that information, that knowledge, to mankind, and because of that, the world was corrupted. And after the flood, we see that there was the age of physical Israel. Abraham came on the scenes at the start of the third millennial day when he was told to come out of Babylon just like the others, and he went to the land, the promised land, until the time of Yeshua, who came in the end of day 4. And then it was the time of the Gentiles for 2,000 years. Yeshua returned back to the Father, just as Hosea 5 and 6 say that he would come and return unto the Father until they acknowledge their offense. For 2 days they would smite them, and on the third day he would rise them up. So for 2,000 years or 2 days, the church has been going around the world, Israel, gathering people in and building the kingdom until Yeshua will return for his 1,000-year reign in the millennial. And the second millennium of that age, because that's the start of the fourth age, but that 1,000-year period, you enter the 8th day, which is the eternal day. The 8 is also a picture of the infinity symbol. And it'll be a new heaven, a new earth. It'll be eternal life. It'll be his will again, because he created all things good. We will only know good again. We'll be perfect. We'll eat from the tree of life freely, and there will be no more darkness, no more night, no more evil, no pain, no tears, no sorrow, no war, no death, no seed, no tree of knowledge of good and evil, and no Satan. We will all be one in immortality, the way that God originally created us. So I hope this teaching has blessed you. Again, the Dead Sea Scrolls, don't let people convince you that they are something other than what the evidence is actually showing, that these were believers in Yeshua. This is where that Paul went after these people, and they preserved these words that were written from the beginning for us today to know that God does love us, that his plan for salvation is real, that Yeshua is the Messiah, that he pre-existed, he came in the flesh, he died for you and me, that we could return back to that immortal state and dwell in the presence of our Father and him, not in garments of flesh, but in garments of spirit of life. All right, Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up his face upon you and give you peace. Shalom.